I swear I didn't mean for him to hear that. Honestly, I'm not that heartless. My name's Melanie. I'm 31 years old. And yeah, I've got a flair for the dramatic. But this wasn't part of some grand plan. I was just sitting at my kitchen table, unloading on my best friend, Tessa. She's the kind of friend who either hypes me up or talks me down, whatever the moment calls for. And right then, I was mid-rant. "You know what, Tessa?" I said, swirling my coffee like I was channeling my inner soap opera star. "If I had the chance to do it all over, I wouldn't have married Nick." Yep, I actually said it out loud. Not quietly, not even under my breath. It just tumbled out of my mouth, casual as if I was talking about regretting a bad haircut. Before you go clutching your pearls, let me explain. It's not like Nick is some kind of monster. He's okay. Honestly, he's decent. But lately, dull, predictable. Like seriously, can scrolling through your phone while ESPN drones in the background even qualify as a hobby? Apparently, in Nick's universe, it does. Tessa gave me a look, her eyebrow arching like she couldn't believe what I just said. "Mel, come on. You don't really mean that." "Don't I?" I shot back, leaning into my soapbox moment. "He's just there. Like a roommate who sometimes helps pay the bills and occasionally screws up the dishwasher. If I'd known marriage would feel like this, I'd have swiped left on the whole idea." And then I laughed, this ridiculous, over-the-top laugh like I was the villain in some cheesy rom-com. Tessa stared at me like I just lost my mind. But before she could say anything, the air in the room changed. Silence. Heavy, awkward silence. I turned my head and there he was, Nick, standing in the doorway, just staring at me. His expression was blank. Not angry, not hurt, just nothing. And let me tell you, the way my stomach hit the floor in that moment, I'd have taken yelling, screaming, anything over that empty look. "Nick," I started, my voice catching, but he just lifted his hand to stop me. He walked over to the counter, grabbed his keys, and headed straight for the door. No yelling, no argument, just the soft thud of the door closing behind him. I sat there, completely frozen, staring at the spot where he just stood. After what felt like forever, I finally turned to Tessa. "What the hell just happened?" She looked at me like I was some kind of alien. "What do you mean, what happened? You literally just said you wouldn't marry him again. What did you expect him to do? Give you a fist bump?" I rolled my eyes, brushing it off. "He's overreacting. He'll be back in an hour, tops." Spoiler alert, he didn't come back. And oh, did I have feelings about that. 1 hour turned into 2, then 3. By the time midnight rolled around, I was curled up on the couch, scrolling through TikTok, pretending I wasn't freaking out. But inside, oh, I was boiling. "Who does he think he is?" I muttered, slamming my phone onto the coffee table. Storming off like that over one stupid comment? Tessa, bless her nosy little heart, was still there, casually scrolling through Instagram like this was a normal girl's night. "Maybe you should text him," she suggested without even glancing up. "Text him?" I snapped. "Why? So he can ignore me and keep acting like a sulky teenager? No thanks. He'll crawl back when he's done with his pity party." But deep down, I was spiraling. Where was he? What was he doing? Who was he with? Okay, that last one was dramatic. This is Nick we're talking about. The guy thinks wearing mismatched socks is a rebellious fashion statement. Still, the thought crossed my mind. By 1 a.m., Tessa finally called it a night, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a rising tide of irritation. I grabbed my phone and sent him a text. "You good?" No response. "Fine. Be that way." I wrapped myself in a blanket, settled into the couch, and told myself I wasn't going to lose any sleep over this. He'd come back when he was ready, and I'd be waiting with a smug little, "I told you so." But he didn't come back. The next morning, his side of the bed looked exactly the same as it had the night before, completely untouched. His toothbrush was still in its usual spot in the bathroom, and his shoes sat neatly by the door, just like always. Okay, so he hadn't packed his bags and left me for good. But seriously, where the hell was he? I tried calling him again, and it went straight to voicemail. Voicemail. Who even listens to those anymore? At that point, I wasn't just annoyed. I was downright furious. How dare he make me sit here worrying like this? It's not like I said anything that terrible. Everyone vents to their friends now and then, right? It's practically a marriage rite of passage. You complain, your friends roll their eyes, and life moves on. But Nick? Oh no. Nick had to turn it into this whole dramatic episode. I grabbed my phone and called Tessa. He's still gone, I blurted out as soon as she picked up. Well, did you apologize? She asked, way too calm for my liking. Apologize? I practically screeched. For what? For being honest. For saying something he wasn't even supposed to hear. Tessa sighed, her patience practically oozing through the phone. Mel, come on. You basically said you regret marrying him. That's kind of a big deal. I rolled my eyes so hard I thought they might fall out of my head. Wow, you sound just like him, I snapped. By lunchtime, I'd had enough of feeling like the bad guy. If he wanted to play ghost, fine. Two could play at that game. And by live my best life, I meant dragging Tessa to a club, fully committed to proving that I didn't need him. What happened next? Let's just say things got messy. I didn't set out to go full chaos mode that night, but sometimes a girl just needs to shake things up. Nick's disappearing act had me riding a roller coaster of emotions. None of them pretty. Tessa, of course, was all in. You need a distraction, she said with a smirk, handing me a dress that could best be described as not exactly church-appropriate. Tight, short, and glittery. It was the perfect outfit for my screw-you mood. We ended up at this packed club downtown, the kind of place where the music pounds so hard you can feel it in your chest, and the crowd is practically on top of each other. Exactly the kind of chaos I needed. At first, it was just dancing, letting the music drown out all the frustrations swirling in my head. But then, tequila made me bold. This guy, tall, decent-looking, with that cocky grin some guys wear like a badge, slid up next to me. He had this air about him like he knew he could get away with just about anything. You look like trouble, he said, leaning in close so I could hear him over the music. And you look like you don't care, I shot back, because sarcasm might as well be my second language. One drink turned into two, and before I knew it, we were laughing. His hand was on my waist, and I was throwing my head back like I didn't have a single problem in the world. Tessa had wandered off, doing her own thing, and well, I was making a point. Was it petty? Definitely. Was it wrong? Probably. But in that moment, felt good. Like if Nick could just walk out and leave me hanging, I had every right to remind myself what it felt like to be noticed. And then it happened. He kissed me. Right there, in the middle of the dance floor under the pulsing neon lights. The crowd buzzed around us, but it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Did I stop him? Nope. I leaned in, fully committing to my terrible decision. When it was over, he smirked at me, that same cocky grin on his face. What's your name? He asked. Melanie? I replied, my voice dripping with more confidence than I actually felt. He handed me his phone. Put your number in, just in case. And I did, because apparently I wasn't done making bad choices for the night. By the time Tessa and I stumbled out of the club, my head was spinning. From the drinks, the music, and, let's be real, the mess I just created. Deep down, I knew I was spiraling, but admitting that? Not yet. Instead, I convinced myself this was Nick's fault. He made me feel like an afterthought, and I wasn't about to let that slide. The guilt wouldn't hit me until later. But oh, when it hit hard. The next morning, I woke up to a pounding headache, smudged mascara, and my phone buzzing like crazy. For a brief second, I thought it might be Nick. Maybe he'd finally realized how ridiculous he was being and decided to come home. Nope, the text wasn't from Nick. Instead, it was from the guy at the club. Apparently, his name was Ryan, because the message read, Morning, Melanie. Had fun last night. Let's do it again sometime. I groaned and tossed my phone onto the nightstand like it was a ticking time bomb. What the hell was I even doing? Around noon, Tessa called, probably ready to dissect my very obvious walk of shame vibes. So, how's my favorite troublemaker feeling today? She chirped. sounding way too chipper for someone dealing with my level of hangover. Like a complete disaster, I mumbled, dragging myself into the kitchen in search of coffee. And before you start, yes, I know I screwed up. Hey, no judgment, she replied smoothly. But maybe you should focus on finding Nick instead of, collecting phone numbers from random guys. I rolled my eyes, even though she couldn't see it. Oh, great. Now you're Team Nick. I'm Team Melanie, she said, her tone suddenly shifting to something more serious. But you're spiraling, and you know it. Have you even tried calling him again? Of course I have. Twice. Both times went straight to voicemail. I hated how small and pathetic it made me feel. Like some desperate wife chasing after a husband who'd rather disappear than deal with me. But as much as I hated to admit it, Tessa had a point. I had to figure out where Nick was. So, I did what any resourceful, panicked woman would do. I put on my detective hat and got to work. I pulled up our bank account, scanning for any clues. Jackpot, there was a charge at a motel just outside of town. Real classy, Nick. Fueled by a mix of anger and determination, I grabbed my keys and drove straight there, fully prepared to storm in and drag him home by his perfectly average haircut. When I reached the front desk, I plastered on a fake smile and asked if he was staying there. Sorry, ma'am, we can't give out guest information, the receptionist said, her customer service grin practically mocking me. Okay, but he's my husband, I shot back, leaning against the counter. I really need to talk to him. Her expression didn't budge. I'm sorry, ma'am. Ma'am. I was 2 seconds away from reaching across the counter and shaking some sense into her, but I realized it wouldn't do me any good. Fuming, I left the motel, certain that Nick was holed up in there, avoiding me like the plague. He wouldn't answer my calls, wouldn't text back, and clearly didn't want to see me. By the time I got home, I was pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. How dare he? Sure, I said a few things I probably shouldn't have, but this level of drama? Completely uncalled for. I grabbed my phone, ready to fire off a strongly worded text, when the front door creaked open. There he was, Nick, calm as ever, strolling in like he hadn't just disappeared for 2 days and left me in a spiral of frustration and panic. Oh, look who finally decided to show up, I snapped, crossing my arms and leaning against the counter. Enjoy your little getaway? Nick didn't respond right away. He set his bag down by the couch, shrugged off his jacket, and turned to face me. We need to talk, he said, his voice steady and maddeningly neutral. Yeah, you think. I shot back, my tone already climbing. 2 days, Nick. 2. You couldn't pick up the phone? You couldn't send a text? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck in that way he always does when he's trying to stay calm. I needed space, Melanie. I needed time to figure out how to even approach this conversation. Oh, give me a break, I scoffed, throwing my hands up. You overheard one private comment, something that wasn't even meant for you, and now you're acting like the world's biggest victim. His eyes darkened slightly, but he didn't take the bait. It wasn't just one comment, he said quietly. It was the kind of thing you don't say about someone you love, even if they're not supposed to hear it. Are you serious right now? I snapped, rolling my eyes. People vent all the time. You're the one who decided to eavesdrop. He blinked, clearly caught off guard by my audacity. Eavesdrop? Really? That's where you're going with this? You're blaming me for hearing you say you regret marrying me? I opened my mouth, ready to fire back. But, ding, that stupid, unmistakable sound of a text message cut through the tension like a knife. Nick's eyes darted to my phone on the counter. Mine followed instinctively, and there it was, the message from Ryan. Nick's jaw clenched as he snatched the phone before I could reach for it. He glanced at the screen, his expression unreadable but heavy enough to make my stomach churn. Ryan, he said, holding up the phone so I could see. Who the hell is Ryan, Melanie? I froze, feeling my heart plummet straight into my stomach. It's not what you think, I stammered, knowing full well that it was the worst possible thing to say in that moment. Not what I think? He repeated, his voice dangerously low. So, let me get this straight. Some random guy texts you, last night was fun, and it's not what I think. I opened my mouth, scrambling for an explanation, a lie, anything. But nothing came out. "Oh my God," he muttered, letting out a bitter, humorless laugh as he set the phone down on the counter. "You've got to be kidding me. Nick, wait," I pleaded, stepping toward him, desperate to stop this from spiraling further. "It wasn't like that. It didn't mean anything. I was just what?" He snapped, his composure finally cracking. "Blowing off steam? Trying to punish me?" He shook his head, the frustration in his eyes turning into something sharper. "Jesus, Melanie, is this how you deal with things? By going out and kissing random guys?" "I didn't hook up with him," I shouted, my voice trembling. "It was just a kiss. A stupid, meaningless kiss. And that's supposed to make it better?" He fired back, his voice laced with anger. "You seriously think that makes this okay? God, Melanie. This says everything I need to know." He turned away, grabbing his bag off the couch and slinging it over his shoulder like it was the easiest decision in the world. "Wait," I called after him, tears already welling in my eyes. "Nick, please, can we just talk about this? I messed up, okay? I know I did, but we can fix it." He paused at the door, his hand resting on the handle. For a split second, I thought he might stay, but then he turned back to me, his face filled with a sadness that hit harder than any anger ever could. "You don't get it, Melanie," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm done. I've spent years trying to make this work, trying to be enough for you, and all I've gotten in return is criticism and betrayal. I deserve better than this." The words landed like a physical blow, knocking the breath right out of me. "Nick, please," I whispered, my voice breaking, but he didn't respond. He opened the door, stepped outside, and shut it behind him, leaving me standing there, tears streaming down my face, alone in the unbearable silence of what used to be our home. The house felt hauntingly quiet after he left, every sound amplified. The low hum of the fridge, the faint creak of the floorboards, even the sound of my own uneven breathing. I stood there, rooted in place, staring at the door, praying he'd walk back in and say he'd changed his mind. But he didn't. Eventually, I sank onto the couch, my head buried in my hands, trying to make sense of it all. How had we ended up here? How had we gone from being happy, or at least pretending to be, to this? I wanted so badly to pin the blame on him. If he hadn't walked out, if he'd just stayed and talked things through like an adult, none of this would have happened. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the full story. This wasn't just about the comment he overheard or even the thing with Ryan. It was everything, the years of nitpicking, the little ways I made him feel small just to boost myself. I had taken him for granted, his patience, his loyalty, his kindness. And now he was gone. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. Regret, anger, despair. Work felt meaningless, food tasted like cardboard, and sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear his voice, calm and heartbreakingly final. "I deserve better than this." God, those words stung. I tried texting him, starting with something light. "Hey, just checking in. Are you okay?" No response. The next message was more direct, almost pleading. "Can we please talk? I'm sorry. I mean it." Still nothing. By the end of the week, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I needed to see him, to talk to him, to somehow undo the mess I'd created. So when Saturday rolled around, and he texted to say he'd be stopping by to grab his things, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd have one last chance to make things right. When Nick walked through the door that afternoon, I barely recognized him. Something about him was different, lighter, more confident. His posture was straighter, his jaw set with determination. He'd trimmed his beard, swapped his usual baggy shirt for one that actually fit, and even his scent was new, like he'd started wearing cologne again. It felt like he'd leveled up, and in the cruelest twist of fate, it wasn't for me. "Hey," I said, standing awkwardly by the counter as he stepped inside. "Hey," he replied, his tone polite but cold. No warmth, no small talk, just a formality. He walked straight past me into the bedroom and began packing his things into boxes. His movements were calm and efficient, each item placed with care, and yet it felt like he was tearing my world apart with every step. This was real. He wasn't bluffing. "Nick," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk? Please?" He paused for a moment and looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Melanie, we've already talked. There's nothing left to say." "There's everything left to say," I blurted out, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. "I know I've been terrible. I know I've hurt you and taken you for granted. I've said things I shouldn't have. But I love you, Nick. I really do. And I'll change. I'll do anything to make this right." He sighed deeply, setting down the box he'd been holding. "Melanie, I believe you when you say that. But the problem is, you're only saying it now because you're scared of losing me. Where was this energy when I was begging for you to care? When I needed you to see me for who I was?" "I see you now," I whispered, tears streaming down my face, each one falling heavier than the last. "It's too late," he said softly, his voice cracking just enough to reveal how hard this was for him too. "I gave you everything I had, Melanie. I can't keep giving when there's nothing left for me." Desperation took over, and I reached out, grabbing his arm like I could physically keep him from leaving. "Please, Nick, don't do this. We can fix it. We can go to therapy. We can." "Melanie," he interrupted, his tone gentle but firm, "I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because, for the first time, I need to choose myself. And maybe you need to do the same." My grip on his arm loosened, my entire body trembling as I let him go. He picked up the last box, paused at the door, and gave me one final look, a bittersweet mix of sadness and finality. Without another word, he walked out, leaving me alone in the aftermath of the mess I'd created. A month later, I saw him at a coffee shop. He was sitting at a table with a woman I didn't recognize. She wasn't stunning in the conventional sense, but she had this effortless confidence about her, natural, unforced, the kind of thing you can't fake. They were laughing and he looked happy. Not the kind of forced, polite happiness I'd seen in him before, but genuine. It hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood frozen, debating whether to walk over and interrupt their moment. But then I saw the way he smiled at her. So easy, so relaxed, and it stopped me in my tracks. When his eyes caught mine, his smile faltered for just a moment. He gave me a small nod, a polite acknowledgement but nothing more. No invitation, no second chances. Then he turned back to her, fully present in their conversation, while I stood there like a ghost from his past. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, the weight of it all pressing down on me harder than ever before. This was my fault. I'd spent so much time tearing him down, pointing out every little flaw to make myself feel bigger, that I hadn't even realized how much he'd been giving me. And now he was moving on, building a new life, while I stood in the ruins of the one we used to share. For the first time, I felt truly alone. And the worst part? I knew there was no one to blame but myself.